What's the connection between receiving in relationships and showing up for ourselves? Well, there is one, and I will try to explain to you the connection by first talking about a couple examples of my own. So, some simple things that I sort of committed to doing for myself recently were I had started drinking a lot more tea, so getting up to 4 cups, 5 cups, by the morning and into the early afternoon. And I didn't really want to necessarily cut back in the tea, but I thought, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to hydrate even better. And so what I'm going to do is try to always have a glass of water before each cup of tea after the first one. And another example was kind of around the same time, I decided, I really need to start rolling out. I have one of those muscle rollers. A foam roller kind of thing. I'm going to try to start rolling out my muscles better, especially in the places I know they get really tight after exercising, sometime during the day after I've exercised a lot in the morning. And well, guess what? I didn't work on them in sort of the habit way that one is supposed to work on, which is kind of a separate point to this from this video. But really, when I was thinking about it later, I realized that that was essentially letting myself down. And around the same time, I maybe had felt sort of picky about some patterns and things that, in my relationship that my partner and I had agreed that would be some changes and that maybe I wasn't seeing or was seeing some slipping back on, and that had to do with me receiving some of my needs. And so I did make that connection. How can I expect someone else to be doing for me, things where I'm not necessarily always keeping these commitments to myself. So part of that has to do, of course, with being understanding, right? Like I said, being understanding about how habits can be changed, being understanding about, people slipping, myself and my partner, and just that that's normal to have that kind of thing happen. But it's also true that, when we're not, especially if it's in a lot of different areas or a lot of different ways, like necessarily meeting our own needs or following through on commitments to ourselves, we are basically training our brains that we don't receive those, or that commitments aren't followed through on, because our primary relationship is our relationship to ourselves. And so what we don't do for ourselves, we often can't receive. And this connection to how we receive when we don't really believe it is, might feel almost a little mysterious, but it really happens in a lot of different subtle ways. Sometimes it's as simple as, we've asked for more communication or let's say it's more words of affirmation from our partner, and we don't even notice it when they do it some of the times, for example. So it could be that we don't notice something. It could be, just in terms of how we are, like our tone isn't receptive, our body language isn't receptive. So there's all these subtle ways actually that can happen. The main point here is to convince you, that our own how we are following through on the relationship with ourselves is important to this. And so I just want to go into a little advice next on how to go about this, because I think it's really important that this doesn't mean that it's a perfectionistic thing. So, like I said, I was trying to make that habit with the water. It's also possible that maybe that was too big a challenge for me right then. Maybe I had too many goals since I was making some other goals at the same time, and I need to take one at a time to build as a habit. So be really thinking about what's the right amount for you, what's the right fit for the goal, is it reasonable? And another thing you could potentially do is chunk it down. So sometimes people take on too big of a goal at once, and it's better to chunk it down to much smaller steps in order to proceed with the goal and follow through for themselves. So I think the most important thing is to notice if you're following through for yourself, realize it's important, and then when you're trying to actually follow through, not to be perfectionist about it, but to try to find and fit the really right goals for yourself to follow through on.